Howdy, patrol members, and welcome back to Tales and Mysteries of the Mojave Patrol for 2025. Yes, this is going to be our first mysterious tale, and it's going to be the tale of the Utah Golem. Yes. But first, let's bite into this Baja Maduro. Got a nice hot mug of mud here. It's a pretty chilly evening here in the bunker. It's only about 63 degrees. At night, it's been getting down into the middle to low 50s. Can we hit the trash can? It's kind of up around the corner here. Oh, did it. Did it. Anyway, got a nice hot cup of mud. Got Red and his brother here. Got Chim Chim, got Hootie and his pals. And old Jack has come out of retirement. Oh, don't need to use that. Got a trusty old lighter here. Compliments of the King Cigar Company. And I can find little or no reference about the King Cigar Company on the internet, yet they made a bunch of engraved lighters to hand them out to somebody. The only, this is a Bowers, and it's actually a clone of a Storm King, and the only problem with these aluminum lighters is, man, they can get hot really quickly, really quickly. Let me get my butt can in a convenient location, my mini butt can. This is a nice mild smoke. Nothing better than a mild smoke on a cold evening. Wind howling, critters baying, crickets cricketing. Getting ready for that Halloween time, the jack-o'-lantern season. Right, Jack? That sly smile of yours, buddy, makes me think you're up to something. So how's everything in your neck of the woods? I know some part of the United States are cooling down rapidly. I know some people living up in Utah already got first snow flurries through there. They didn't stick, but there was snow. And then, is it warm enough for you people in the southern regions? Must be. Must be. Ooh, hot coffee. I am a little chilly. Ooh. Anyway, I'm going to tell you a true story. Now, I didn't see this myself, but it was relayed to me by a gentleman I used to work with named Rob. And he told me a story about a time long ago. Now, he's older than I am. So this takes place somewhere around the late 1950s, early 1960s. Rob and his sister Sue, They used to live in Arizona by the mountains. And his mom and dad wanted nothing more than to obtain a little getaway cabin where they could spend the weekends um, hiking and maybe fishing. His dad liked to fish. So after much saving and much hunting, remember, no internet in those days, his dad and mother had saved up a sum of money, and then they started looking for a small getaway place up in the mountains. Well, about an hour and a half, 90-minute drive from their place was a small town up in the mountains, and they went up to the local general store, and they asked around if anybody had any property for sale. Well, the store manager, or the owner of the store, told him, oh, he was in luck. There was a guy that had a small cabin big enough for the four of them, about 10 miles outside of town, up in the mountains, and he was willing to let it go. It's about 5 acres with a cabin on it. There were no facilities. There was an outhouse, but, you know, back in 1958 or whatever, 59, you know, that's what you got. I know my grandparents didn't have a flush toilet and a bathroom attached to their house until sometime in the 1950s, and that was in New York on Long Island. As a matter of fact, they didn't even get a bathtub or a shower in until the 70s, and they used to wash in the kitchen sink. When we would stay, my brother and I would stay with them, we'd wash in the sink, you know, with a washcloth and brown soap, and that's where you got clean. No modesty those days. Anyway, I digress. The story's not about me. It's about Rob and Sue. Anyway, while they waited in the general store, the owner of the general store got in touch with the guy who owned the property, and he met him at the store, and they all drove out, and there was a small it was a little cabin, about 900 square feet, more like it was a log cabin. That's the way Rob described it to me. And there were 3 rooms. There was the kitchen, dining area, and there were 2 small, like, bedrooms, or 2 small rooms that could be used as bedrooms, right? One of the rooms had 2 rope cots, like bunk beds, you know, where you just put up pieces of 2x6, and you run rope through it back and forth, crisscross, and then you could lay a mattress on it, and that's a bed. And there was another one, right? And so apparently that's where Rob and Susie were going to sleep, and the parents would sleep in the room next door. And of course there was a wood stove and a table and 4 chairs, and that's pretty much it. And there was just a couple of windows that had wooden shutters, and you know, use your imagination. It was a log cabin. So this is on about 5 acres, which is a pretty big parcel. So after walking around the property and coming to an agreement on price, they shook hands, signed the paperwork right there on the little wooden table in the cabin, and Rob's folks were the proud owners of a new little cabin in the woods to them, new to them, right? And then Rob heard what to him were magic words. Oh, and by the way, up on the hill, a couple 100 yards behind the cabin, there's an abandoned silver mine. It's all played out, but it's there. So you youngins, be careful around that silver mine. That's all I needed to hear. He couldn't wait to get in that silver mine. So they drove home that day, and they made a plan for the next month to come up and spend their first weekend in the cabin. Well, Rob could not wait. He gathered himself up his survival equipment for those days. A Boy Scout knife, a flashlight, and a canteen. That was all you needed. Well, the morning came. His mom and dad had bought a couple of cots. They each had an air mattress. They had blankets. They had a Coleman stove. His mother didn't really fancy cooking on a wood stove. I guess she had too much of that when she was young. And a couple of Coleman lanterns, and they were on their way. On their way. And he says, I was electrified in the back seat of that station wagon we had, that old Woody station wagon. They drove up there, pulled up next to the cabin, unloaded everything in the cabin. And there was an old fire pit out on the side of the cabin. They all sat around out there in the aluminum folding lawn chairs. They had a fire. They toasted marshmallows, sang songs. They went back in the cabin when it got late, lit the Coleman lanterns, and settled down for their first night in the cabin. So Rob says this is where it starts to get spooky. They're all sound asleep. Either all snuggled in their sleeping bags and blankets under air mattresses. Rob just cannot wait to get into that abandoned silver mine the next morning. Well, he's just dozing off and hears a crunching noise. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Something is walking around outside the cabin. So now he's all kind of like tense. What could it be? Anyway, he finally drifts off to sleep. And in the morning, his mother's frying up bacon and eggs and hash browns on the Coleman stove. They're all sitting around, eating off their tin plates. Mom and Dad having coffee when Rob says, Dad, I thought I heard something walking around the cabin last night. And his dad says, oh, probably a deer, maybe a bear. All kinds of wild creatures up here in these woods, Rob. Don't worry about it. So, Rob didn't think much about it. So the next morning, they get up and they go to the abandoned silver mine, Rob and Susie. They walk through the woods, they follow the path, and there, just like the old previous owner said, was the old framed-in portal of a mine. Steel rails coming out of it, curving off, a little tailing pile down the side of the mountain. And he and Susie, he lights his flashlight, gets a good grip on that Boy Scout knife, and they start walking into the mine, shining their lights around, right? And they smell something musty. Not a dead smell, but a musty smell. Really heavy, musty smell. Well, Susie doesn't like it. She wants to go back. Rob, he's all hell-bent for leather going in deeper, but she is really starting to get scared. So, a little disappointed, they head back to the portal. And they're sitting around talking about how much money might have come out of that mine. Is there any silver left that they didn't find? Maybe they'll find silver. Maybe they'll all be rich, young teens and how they think. So Rob and Susie think they hear rocks fall inside the mine. So Susie goes, oh, what if it's not safe? What if it's collapsing? Rob goes, no, it's not collapsing. So, on a whim, he picks a rock up and he throws it as far into the mine as he can. And here's a clatter, right? Susie does the same thing. Throws a rock in there as far as she can. Next thing you know, they're pitching rocks, listening to the echoes as they bounce off the wall. When suddenly, a rock comes back out. Now, Rob thinks it's one of the rocks they threw in, bounced off, and came back. But Susie's not so sure. So Rob says, you wait here and I'm going to walk in. He lights his flashlight and he starts walking into the mine. Well, all of a sudden he hears a weird sound, like a huffing sound. And he looks up and he swears in the beam of the flashlight he sees something rushing him. He turns around and beats feet out of that mine, but nothing ever appears outside the mine. So they run back to the cabin. Mom, Dad, you'll never believe what happened. So the mom and dad listen to the whole story, and his dad's like, son, it might have been a bear. That's why you got to be careful. That's why the guy said be careful around here. Could be a bear in that mine. He says, I don't know, Dad, do bears throw rocks back out of the mine? So he says, no, son, they don't. But it was probably just like you thought. A rock bounced off something and came back out. So let's just try to stay away from that mine. Well, Susie went back in the room to change her pants. They had gotten a little muddy exploring around the mine. And Rob was in the front room with his parents, and his dad said, you know what? Just to be on the safe side, maybe we should go into town and tell the constable. What if there's a tramp or a hobo living in that mine? What if he's dangerous? We don't know, so we should find out. So they pile into the car, they drive back into town, they go to the general store tells them where the constable's office is, they go down there. And the constable's name, as Rob tries to remember, he didn't remember his last name, but he knew his first name was probably Tom. So they're talking to Tom, the constable, or the sheriff. And he says, well, there is a railroad that passes about 5 miles south of the town. It could be hobos or tramps. So he says, tomorrow morning I'll come up and take a look. Well, smoke's getting away from me here. That's what happens when you talk and don't smoke, right? Let me pull that away. So anyway, they're driving back up to the cabin. Rob picked up a couple of comic books, and so did Susie. They're in the back seat reading the comic books. He glances up, and he can see they're approaching the cabin. He glances back down at his comic book, and he hears his dad says, "Who the hell is that?" And they glance up, but they don't see anything. And Rob's mom goes, "What did you see, dear?" And he said, I could have swore I saw a small person looking into the cabin window. But when he turned to look at her and looked back, it was gone. So she says, could it have been a coyote up on its front paws looking in the window, or maybe a wolf? So the dad thinks, well, yeah, you could have been. But I'm glad the constable's coming in the morning. That night they didn't sit outside, they didn't have fun, right? They stayed inside the cabin and they played cards. Well, it was getting late. They go to sleep. And just about sunup, Tom gets up, and boy is he thirsty. So he gets up and he wanders into the front room, and they had got one of those igloo coolers, you put it on, I don't know if it was Igloo brand, but a cooler with a water spout in it. Hang on. Oh no! Did I hurt you? I was getting this. This is from the 1940s. This is an actual Aladdin cooler. I just picked it up the other day. Had to make a new gasket for it here. Everything works fine, but so you don't have to use your imagination as much. This is probably the type of thing that Tom was getting water out of back in 1959, 1958. Where was I? Oh yeah. Tom got up. He went into the table, to the water cooler, and was getting himself a cup of water. While he's drinking, he turns and he looks out the cabin window to where their Woody is parked. And he says what he saw froze him to the floor. He couldn't move, couldn't even utter a sound. There, looking in the car window, trying to open the door, was what he called a creature. Wasn't a man, wasn't Bigfoot, but about 5 feet tall, with a thin body and a large head with really small ears and great big, huge round eyes and a really truncated face, was staring into the car window. And he said it creepily was licking the car window, right? But trying to open the door. It was covered with really scrawny hair. And it had long fingers on each hand. But Tom said the thing that really scared the heck out of him was that there were only 4 fingers on each hand, not 5 like a human being. He set the cup down on the windowsill, and it tapped the glass, and that was enough. The creature spun around and stared at him full face. Big yellowish eyes, little tiny face, nose and mouth. It put its hands up and made a scritching sound and turned and bolted. That was enough for Tom. He ran into the parents' bedroom screaming. Woke his mom and dad up. They come out of bed in their pajamas. What's up? What's up? Tom relayed to his parents exactly what he saw. Tom said, I'm not ashamed to say I was crying. I was so scared. Susie came out, and when she heard the story, she sat down in a chair and started trembling and telling her mom she didn't want to stay there. She wanted to go. But his dad wouldn't think of it. He says, honey, I'm sure that all that Rob saw, Rob, that's what I'm talking about. I'm sure that all Rob saw was a tramp or a hobo. It was just some down on his luck person. And Tom's like, oh, Dad, it wasn't a person, man. He only had 4 fingers on each hand. He had this leathery looking parchment-like skin, and he had yellow eyes and almost no hair and little tiny ears. And well, fortunately, the constable was going to come out that morning, try to be there before 10. So Mom made breakfast. They all sat around a table. They all stayed in the cabin, and around 10:30, Tom said he heard a welcome sound. It was the Jeep belonging to the constable. So the constable came, and he relayed the story to the constable, and his dad told the story about he thought he saw someone looking in the window of the cabin when it came around the bend. So the constable says, okay, enough is enough. So he goes to his car and he gets a handgun, and he comes in and he asks Rob's dad. He says, Rob, he says, sir, do you have a firearm? And he says, yeah, he did. So his dad had a little .22 revolver. So he says, okay, we're going up and check the inside of that mine. Because if he's staying any place, that's where he's staying. Because Rob said, I told the sheriff about the musty smell. I saw something rush me from the mine. Something threw rock at us. So the sheriff and the dad take off towards the mine. And they're gone for a couple of minutes. And Rob just could not sit there and resist it. So he got his flashlight and ran after him in case they needed the flashlight. And he catches up with him. His dad says, "Why are you here?" He says, "Oh, Dad, I thought you might need the flashlight if you're going to mine." "Okay, just stay out of the way." So they get up there, they get up there, they get up there. They get to the entrance of the mine, and his dad snaps on the flashlight in one hand, pistol in the other. The constable's got a pistol in his hand. And they walk in the entrance of the mine, and they shout, "Who's in here? Who's in here? Better come out. This is the law." Tom remembers saying, "It's the law. You better come out if you know what's good for you." Then they heard the same screeching sound that Tom heard that morning. And he said, boy, that chilled him too. His blood froze in his veins. When all of a sudden the creature shot out of the flipping mouth of that tunnel, knocking aside his dad and the sheriff, and took off hell-bent for leather towards the small lake, which is about a half a mile down this trail. Well, bang, they were after it. They were after it. It's running down the trail. They're running behind it. Tom said he couldn't believe how fast this thing ran. It would jump over fallen logs. It would scrabble over any kind of obstacle in its way and just kept going towards the lake. So the trail made a sharp left turn towards the lake, but the creature did not take that left turn. It took off into the woods, and they followed it. It had to climb up the next hill. There were some rocks. And the constable said, "You better stop or I'm going to shoot." And it didn't stop, and the constable shot 2 or 3 times. They heard that screeching noise again, but the creature made it to the top of the hard scrabble and then kept on going. Well, they just couldn't follow it any farther. It was just too rough, right? But the sheriff goes, "I know I got it. I know I got it." Says, "We'll come up here in a couple of days with dogs, and we'll see if we can find the body." So they spent that night in the cabin. They were all scared, but they spent the night. There was no problem. They got up next morning. They drove home. 3 weeks later, they went back. They were going back up to the cabin. They stopped with the constable, and the constable said, "Well, we went up there with dogs. We couldn't find the body. But, you know, you're not the first people who've seen strange things like that up in that area, you know. But I know I got it. I got it square in the back, so, you know, who knows what happened." Well, Tom said for the rest of the time his parents owned that cabin, and they owned the cabin until they passed away. And he and his sister finally sold it off to someone else and split the money. And Rob said, "We never went back to that silver mine to look inside. For all we know, the creature doubled back, crawled in there, and died. We don't know. But I wasn't about to go back in and find out. Neither was my sister. And my folks weren't too keen on that either." So he recalls that his dad went down and talked to the constable and the general store owner. And about 6 or 8 months after they had purchased the property, they came up there and dynamited that portal closed. So if there was ever anything ever in there, it was trapped in there. Though Tom said, "You know, I don't know if there was more than one entrance to that mine. Nobody knew, so there could have been. But we were never bothered by that again. Even though every time I spent the night in that cabin, it was in the back of my mind. But we had a lot of fun years in that cabin. My dad and I would go fishing on the little lake, and we ended up getting a boat with a little outboard motor and storing it up there. And, you know, there was nothing but happy memories after that weekend. But what the heck was that thing? Wasn't Bigfoot. Was it an alien trapped on Earth for God knows how many decades? Can't get back home? The remnant of an extinct race? Who knows? Who knows? But that's conjecture. I got more stories for another time. So I think next story is gonna be about the mysterious underground tunnels near Mount McKinley. That's kind of a creepy story. But anyway, Until next time, I want to thank you all for joining me here at Tales of Mystery of the Mojave Patrol. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment. And there'll be a whiskey review coming up. And on Halloween night, there's going to be a special, pardon me, special whiskey review with an old friend of mine that you haven't seen in a long time. Well, you probably won't get to see him. He's pretty camera shy. But you'll hear him. And he's going to bring a whiskey that is hard to come by. So until next time, later, Mater.
I bring you a warning. Every one of you listening to my voice, tell the world. Tell this to everybody wherever they are. Watch the skies everywhere. Keep looking. Keep watching the skies.